Hey, everybody. Welcome to our Fireside chat here at Shadow Ventures. I'm KP Reddy, and I've got my friend Marty here today. Marty, where you at today?
I'm in Chicago today. Be back in San Francisco this evening.
So Marty, I would say we became friends in person doing this thing with one of our friends called Web Whiskey Weekend, where a bunch of us go off out in the woods somewhere and drink whiskey all weekend. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then we kind of got to be friends. I would say just through ongoing through social media and all that, and kind of had some common interests in venture investing and all. So our goal, Marty, is to kind of expose our broader market that we deal with in the built environment to new and upcoming trends that maybe they don't see and right in front of them, and give them a view of the world. So thought we'd start off, like, if you want to give a little bit of your background. I know we posted your bio, but I think what's more interesting is there's some of us that kind of grew up through like the .com. So when we start talking about Web3, like we've seen this movie before a little bit. So just want to maybe give context a little bit to your background and how it informs like Web3, given you were probably there at Web1.
Yeah. So I start my career as a designer, front-end engineer, and this is, in the early 2000s. That's a pretty rare combination of skill sets. It was very much segmented between those who were engineers and those who designed, mostly for print. So to design for the web was one thing. To design and build for the web was pretty unique. Only a handful of folks in the world were really thinking about the world this way, and used that skill to start up a few companies, had a few exits, worked at a few places like Twitter and Eventbrite, just bigger startups, the unicorns, and add with them at pivotal moments where they go from pre-IPO to IPO. So just watching those transformations. But I think to your earlier point, there's two things. One is we have seen this movie before, and for anyone who's out there that's hearing the word Web3, Web 3.0, and it just sounds silly and you're rolling your eyes. I'm sure KP was with me in the 2000, probably like 4 or 5 era, when the word Web 2.0 first comes out, because it's a meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. It's not like it's a tech stack, or you can program in Web 2.0 or Web 3.0. It's a semantic label. So I think that confuses a lot of folks, and we had the same problem before. And what got me most excited about this area in this moment in time is that a lot of the folks that I saw when I was first coming up in my career in the early 2000s that were fighting the good fight, they were saying that there was a new way to build for the web, and there was this like semantic web, and things were going to be more extensible, and things like JavaScript were going to be more prominent. Now today it's like, yeah, everything's powered by JavaScript, but there was a time where the smartest CEOs in the room, looked at JavaScript as like the most evil piece of technology that could exist. Browsers had it, deactivated by default. It was full of security holes, and it was just this huge vulnerability. And so like it was this dirty word. And now you couldn't imagine building anything without using JavaScript. And so, I'm seeing a lot of the folks that fought that fight, and they were proven right. And it turned out that the world did go the way that they said it was going to go. And despite all of the Fortune 100 CTOs, all of the smart folks saying like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And now those same folks, not to say that like, they're always going to be right, but there is some value in pattern recognition. They, at this very moment, almost all of them are poking around at this Web3 thing. They're exploring, they're experimenting. And so to me, that doesn't mean that it's going to be the next big thing, but it's definitely a strong signal that like, if those folks who fought the good fight last time around are thinking that this is a place that's worth their time, then I think it's advantageous for us to understand what's going on, what's happening, how the world's going to shift, and where it's going to go directionally.
Yeah, I mean, I think like whenever I get in these arguments with people about like the power of experimentation, I'm like, we went to the moon and we got Velcro. Like, that's okay, right? Like, I mean, not everything has to be, there's all the things that happen along the way. To your point, like back when I started, it was Mosaic, and then, we're having browser wars, and like all this stuff starts happening, like it just shifts around. There's winners and there's losers, right? Netscape didn't win, but, Andreessen seems to be doing okay. but you know what I mean? So it's this power of experimentation and iteration. And I think that's where people see Web3 and they want to define it very definitive, like, oh, this is the next new thing. And it's really like a little bit, it's the next new experiment. And there's a lot of tools and things happening, but we're not sure what's shaken out.
Well, to your point with the moon, where I think some of the conversations get frustrating is that this isn't binary. It isn't Web3 wins or crypto wins or Bitcoin wins or nothing. It's no, there's a shift happening. There's an evolution happening. We don't ultimately know how it's going to pan out or what it's going to look like, but the change is occurring, and there's going to be a lot of evolutions that come along the way. And so just to say that, hey, I don't believe that X, Y, or Z is going to go this certain direction, so I'm out, like that seems kind of short-sighted. It's like, no, like follow, you don't have to believe in the full thing, but just know that there is a fundamental change occurring, and you don't want to be, totally left behind.
Yeah, this morning we're doing like our weekly huddle, and I brought up, crossing the chasm, and there's the classification of, and it's kind of like, look, if you need to be that person to wait to see how it all pans out, that's cool. Like that, that's cool. Don't play the game now. Like, but if you're the person that wants to always figure out what the next new thing is, and if there's something there, and are willing to take the risks with, your money's one thing. That's pretty, like, it's not I think money is much more intangible than our time. And go spend time, and we're, listening to the podcasts and reading the white papers and talking about it. Like, that's actually the bigger investment, is our intellectual capacity to focus on this stuff. Then just wait till
I do think this is where people get hung up, is that it hurts a little to realize that sometimes in certain situations on the chasm, you're not an innovator. You're not even an early adopter. Like you're a laggard. And like, we all want to think that we're hip and we're cool and we know like the latest gadget and the newest thing, but like there are some times in some spaces where that's just not us. And we got to be comfortable with that. And I think where the conversation gets derailed a little bit is sometimes the loudest voices, they just happen to not be innovators in this particular, innovation cycle. They are going to be a laggard, and it's going to take a while for mass adoption to hit. And I mean, the last thing I'll say on that too is, I think the other thing that derails the conversation a little bit is when we say, oh, isn't the way that the tool works now, like, it's not broken, why go fix it? But I mean, then like to the point of the browser wars, we'd still have IE6. We needed Google to come, because when Google first launched Chrome, everyone rolled their eyes. Like, does Google know anything about web browsers? Should they be building a web browser? Do we need another web browser? Isn't Firefox good enough, right? But we want to push to make things bigger, better all the time.
I remember when I forgot the first invite to Gmail, when it was like the invite only. I declined it because I'm like, why do I have Hotmail? Like, what? It's fine. Like, why are they even doing like free email? What's that revenue model? Like, but now look, right. But so one kind of, I would say a little bit of a nerdy topic, but a higher level topic, is this whole idea of like decentralized, centralized. And my mom was a mainframe programmer. So I think of that as like, okay, that's where I started my computing career, was like my mom talking about COBOL, right? To now. And there's a little bit of something that says there's a cycling that happens around centralized and decentralized that a lot of times is driven by the cost of compute and the network bandwidth to connect those compute resources. And we cycle through this based on the innovation that's happening on those two ends, on the node where you have the compute, and then the pipes that connect the different nodes. And I think every once in a while I joke around on Twitter just to see if anyone's paying attention, but like I used to run like a Wildcat BBS, right? I had 9600 modems sitting in my closet. And that was kind of like this, decentralized. It was me and my little people. And then I had a little gateway out to the internet every once in a while. But I mean, when we think about this cycling of from mainframe to client server to at one time what we called ASP, that became the web, that became cloud. And then now we're kind of saying, oh, well, we don't want big tech looking at all our, they have all our centralized data. Like, now let's decentralize. But let's decentralize the stuff that matters to us, like maybe financial, even social to a certain degree. People are saying like, I'm tired of like having people like knowing, other than me and my friends, knowing what's going on. So now we're playing around with, Telegraph or whatever else people are playing around with. There's almost like too many things to It's like I always miss someone's message somewhere because there's too many ways to connect with people.
Yeah.
Do you think
Ironically, I almost want a centralized place for all of my decentralized messaging apps.
right. I know, I hear you. I totally hear you. That just means you're getting old. But
Yeah.
by the way, the cool factor, my kids are now 21 and 19, raising two teenagers, you quickly realize you're not that cool. So, the cool factor of being an innovator, I'm no longer attached to anyway. But do you think of Web3 as just being just another this cycle of churn that says like, hey, we built out all these pipes, we all have like massive internet, but it turns out now we're doing all these high compute things that the bandwidth, and then now like another network layer, right? We've had another network layer that matters to us all of a sudden, which is privacy, and the use of our data is almost like a network. Maybe it's an application layer thing, but do you think of this as like just another evolution of the ongoing cycle of centralized to decentralized?
Yeah, and I think even if you just want to get even less technical about it, this is just an evolving like consumer preference that's quickly becoming a consumer demand for more control and ownership, and I think that the consumer themselves having the ownership, but then ensuring that some legal entity doesn't have the sole ownership or the sole responsibility of something. And so that seems to be what's really driving a lot of this. And when I look at like larger consumer trends, and we like take this to like a 30,000 foot, you're noticing a lot of trends in a very young demographic now. Like your 12 to 18-year-olds, where they're making very conscious decisions not to interact with a brand or an organization if they don't line up with their beliefs. And I think a lot of us, we're hip to understanding this conceptually. I think Gen Z is very vocal about this, but like maybe doesn't do it in practice. They say save the environment, but they drive an SUV. But this younger demographic, they're much more strict with following through. And I think what we need to prepare for is over the next decade, when they become the larger consumer base, we're all going to have to adapt to this greater preference. And I think decentralization is going to be a big part of that. And this is one where again, if you're on this call and you're struggling with believing in Web3 or believing in crypto or Bitcoin, like just take that part out of it. This is about, to your point, decentralization. This is about a new way to think about how we store and manage data, who owns the data, who has control of the data, and that becomes like the center of the conversation.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit one off, right? Acronyms at a time, right? So let's start off with NFTs, and I don't think we have to go into definition. I think people can Google definition; they don't need to tune into us. But what do you think? What is the best describer? Which you maybe had to do it at Thanksgiving with grandma, crazy uncle, whoever. Like, how would you best describe what an NFT is to someone that's not super technical?
Yeah, I think I mean, at a very high level, it's a new asset class, and it's a digital one. So, something that lives in the cloud that you assign value to, and you hold it, and you can resell it. But if I want to make it a little bit bring it back down a little bit more, it is just this representation of ownership. And so it could be this cartoon monkey that someone decides worth $400,000, and you could roll your eyes at that. But I think when we look at NFTs over the long period and how they might impact all of our businesses, what we're going to see is this shift in how all ownership works. And so even if we just think about constructs that make sense to us today, but if you really think about them, they do seem kind of archaic. The fact that like when my wife and I go to buy a house, she's really just like a co-signer on this loan. It's very weird in that sense. And then in a future world where we could see where we'll have fractional ownership of everything will be more commonplace, like we saw with the emergence of Robinhood. But the fact that like my wife and I already have fractional ownership of the house, just happens to be 50-50 ownership because that's how we decided to do it. But there's a future world where we don't buy the house as two human personal entities, social security numbers that came into this loan together, but we're buying it around, and this is another term that we'll end up talking about later, but like around something like a DAO, or some kind of, we are this combined entity, but it means we can bring other people in, where KP can decide, oh, Marty's buying some penthouse in New York City. Instead of him and his wife, having 50-50, I want 5% of that. And so, an NFT would be a future way to handle that. But even just more practically, an NFT to me is this this digital asset that can take things that we had in the past and bring new life to them, and add just imagine like a digital layer to a physical object. And the one that I usually reference is like a ticket stub. So imagine that if we had NFTs back in the 60s, and you went to Woodstock and you had a Woodstock ticket stub and it was digital, that would hold value today, and you could resell that. And there are people resell Woodstock ticket stubs on eBay all the time. But here's one where like it can come now with like digital complements, like unique soundtracks, or private messages from artists. Your ticket stub would have a greater value. I mean, it was all general admission, but if you went to like an arena, like what row you're on, what seat you're in, like these would all be things that would increase or decrease the value. But just imagine like any kind of asset we have now having all these like digital complements. I almost look at it as like the future of something like Patreon, where I can get more backstage access content to things if I'm a member. And a lot of people, I'll leave it on this too, is they're using NFTs as membership into communities or clubs. And so by having one, it's almost like a card or a pass, and then you get all this exclusive content by having ownership.
Yeah, I mean, I like your concert ticket reference, because I have like a bunch of CDs and vinyl, and every concert I went to, I kept the ticket stub and I put it in the CD or in the vinyl case, and I still have all that shit, right? And I always, whenever we do the e-ticket stuff, I'm like, oh, it kind of sucks. Like I don't have any kind of souvenir, so to speak, from this event, from this life event. So I think that's a pretty good one to steer.
I mean, just on that real quick, I think the helpful thing is to always think about not only like the fun aspect, like digitizing a ticket stub, something that once sat like, on a vanity mirror, and they just collected with all of your other memorabilia, but like think about the practical to like business and like homeowners insurance. If your home burnt down right now and you're trying to get your items replaced, and you're telling them about this $1,200 mountain bike that you had, they're going to ask for a receipt. And you're going to have to go dig around to see if you can find a receipt from a bike you bought 8 years ago. And most likely you're not going to have it. And this is now, imagine a world where you did digitize some of your assets, and in your, say, NFT collection was, your mountain bike, and that you did assign value to it. And now it's all documented somewhere. Like these are things where like there would be some actual like practical use cases for things like insurance and ownership, and like documenting these things in like a ledger, per se.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. So I want to shift a little bit to our industry, the industry that I live in. So, I had this great experience working for Frank Gehry, and Frank had this way of like, it didn't matter how many hours it took to draw a design. That was irrelevant. It was like, but it's Frank Gehry, right? It's like Frank Gehry. So there was this intangible from a Starchitect. So you start learning how he quoted prices, had nothing to do with what the effort was, right? It had nothing to do with, there was no worksheet of how many hours it would take. And one of the things you see with creators that I think is really cool about NFT, if you're an artist and you create something, you get to sell it and monetize it for what it's worth today. And then some other asshole comes along and, after you die, and monetizes your creativity, your life's work, and you kind of got nothing for it. And one of the things that when I started researching NFTs, this idea of this like annuity, this perpetual, like from the creator, that you could get like a slice every time it's sold. And so I started thinking about it with, in my world, architects are our creators. They go to way too many years of school. They intern for like no pay. And when they make it, they can like buy a house, right? I mean, they don't, there's a few that make a ton of money. The majority, they just do well for humanity and make a good living. But that's one of those things that's always been out there, is as an architect, I create this great IP, and then some real estate developer monetizes it and makes a bunch of money off of my IP, and I kind of get nothing for it. They paid me, the architect from the Empire State Building doesn't get paid today, right? They just got paid once. They probably got paid like $1,000 years ago, right? So to me, that's been fascinating for our industry. I mean, how do you think, like, from the creator side of this idea of like the perpetual, like getting paid perpetually for the increasing value of your asset, and how that might apply to things like a design of a building, a design of anything where people feel undervalued, a design of a logo. I mean, that's a lot of the stuff that's coming out is art, but I mean, I think people miss that this idea that the creator keeps getting paid.
Yeah, well, if we go back to the ticket stub example, imagine a world where Ticketmaster, every time you resold that concert ticket, got its 4% back, right? And then now you can, but imagine a world where like your ticket stub had a value, and then you could resell it in the future. In theory, you could resell it for more than the original cost of the ticket. Like you could start going to concerts essentially for free, which is like a pretty cool construct. But like imagine that Ticketmaster, keeps its 4 to 6% perpetually, and then imagine that there's a rev share with the artists, Taylor Swift, Justin Bieber, whoever, and then that incentivizes them to keep adding to the supplemental content that goes with it, so that it helps it resell. Like, so imagine there's a world where Taylor Swift actually gives a shit about a concert she did 6.5 years ago, because that concert stub is like still nets her $50 million a year in resales. Like that would be radical. It would change everything. And so like that's where I think like a lot of this potential is. It's this financial incentive to bring value to things that we didn't traditionally monetize. Like when I was working at Eventbrite, I thought it was so fascinating when I looked at the data. I mean, it seems so obvious when you say it out loud, but the majority, 99% of their event inventory is from events that had already occurred. Only 1% of current events are the ones that are ongoing. The rest of them had, happened in the past, because every day that an event, is published and it happens, then it becomes an old event. But Eventbrite, that's 99% of their event inventory that like just collects dust and costs, server space. That's it, and relatively small amount of storage space. But imagine where there's value in 99% of their inventory now. Imagine where you would give a shit about a JavaScript meetup from 3.5 years ago. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that it's a really cool prospect to think that we could monetize something like that and bring value to it, or give creators, more places to put their creation, and not just on future things, but on things they did from the past as well.
Yeah, I think it also, interesting enough, it aligns the creator to not over create, like the scarcity index, right? So, if I'm Michael Jordan and I sign a few jerseys and they're now worth $20,000, like I'm incentivized to sign more jerseys. But if I know I'm going to keep getting a slice, like me creating my own scarcity, or in the world of an architect that maybe designs a couple of house plans, and and people do kind of remonetize their designs and ideas for the next client. Maybe they decide not to, because they want to create a level of uniqueness. And every time that house sells, they're getting another slice. And the more scarcity they can create in that look and feel and that experience, they're incentivized not to cookie cutter some of their designs. So I think that's what really attracted me, this idea that the creator can get paid and kind of create scarcity and authenticity around like what they're doing and keep getting paid, which is, I think, fantastic. So
yeah, I think it's just going to change. Like the economics of that are going to change the dynamics like tremendously. I just think we're going to see. I mean, we're already seeing it in this creator economy, but I just think we're going to continue to see lots of shifts in that space.
All right, cool. So hopefully everybody, they're now experts on NFTs.
Yeah.
So let's talk about DAOs. What's the best way to describe a DAO? And then I want to talk about, because I know you were a contributor to the DAO Constitution, so let's just hit on that a little bit. But kind of for the dinner party, what's a DAO?
Yeah, so there's 3 ways to look at a DAO. The way that everyone would want you to look at it, and how I'd want to describe it, is it's a modern way to form an organization of any kind, a nonprofit, an LLC, a homeowners association, but the idea is that it actually attributes back to like the old mutual model. It's a group of people who come together for the benefit of the people within the group. So, we've got 1,000 people who are in a life insurance, mutual together, and they all want to make sure that everyone stays as healthy as possible because then all their premiums stay low. And so it's the benefit of the group for the group. And so that's the construct of a DAO, like relatively old construct from, a few hundred years ago, but now like in the Web3 space, this idea of decentralization and transparency and just putting more things on the blockchain, like we're able to do it at scale. Now that's what the way we'd like to talk about it. The way you'll see it used a lot, and this is where like you'd want to roll your eyes or make fun or poke, jokes at it, is, it's really just an over embellished Facebook group. It's a bunch of people who get on that, are voting. We talk about voting as a very important part of DAO, but like they're just making comments. And in this world, Facebook is replaced with Discord. Discord is where a lot of this conversation happens, but like you can just think of it as, just imagine like Nextdoor meets Facebook groups, and like all of the chaos that would ensue with something like that, where you've got a bunch of like, radical commentary and a bunch of naive commentary, and then you've got a handful of really smart folks in the room, and some of the worst actors are bigger voices than the best actors. So all of that, I think, is to be figured out, to understand like how this is going to come to fruition. This is one of those things where it might not be DAOs, but the concept of people coming together and centralizing and taking more control, especially around like affinity groups, or just in any way niche segments. Like this isn't an if, this is a when. And it might not be in, what we call Web3, it might not be coming DAO, but like this is coming and this is happening, and people are going to organize more and more together and, start to have more legal ramifications around it. And one thing I'll just leave on the DAO is important for people to know, like, because I think it was a big deal this April, the state of Wyoming made it so that a DAO could be recognized as a legal business entity. So it's actually the same formation as an LLC, but you can have a DAO, basically business entity.
Got it. So my 21-year-old son, about every quarter when he has to pay his insurance premium, comes to me and says, "Dad, why can't we just be self-insured? Like, why can't we just put some money in a bank? Like, why are we paying the insurance company, all these people that sit at their desks and all this stuff? Why can't we just be self-insured?" I was like, well, you can. It ties up capital. Like, there's all these reasons why. So in theory, if him and his buddies all decided, like, we're a young group, our health insurance premium, we don't get sick that much. We're all 20 something ish. And maybe they, if you look at all the actuarial tables, right, there's a bias against women. Women are more expensive to insurance. So maybe him and his fraternity brothers decide they want to do their own health insurance policy and do it via DAO and be self-insured. Theoretically, it seems like they could do that. They could get enough money and enough of a sampling group to mitigate the risk, and then have some smart contract around how, when you do have an incident, how do you, would that be a reasonable use case for?
Yeah. I mean, there's still like, in that very specific example, which I actually spent a lot of time thinking about, because I always use the example of, what if a bunch of marathoners got together, all the marathoners in the country. These are people who are healthy by nature and they take their health very seriously. So you would assume that, you're going to have better premiums with this group. There's not a lot of fast food there. And there's not a lot of heart attacks happening, with heart disease. So, which is still like the number one killer. So that would be, devastating. Well, it would be laughable at first to your Liberty Mutuals, Mass Mutuals, Northwestern Mutuals. They would think it was funny and hilarious. But the second that the African American community said, we want our own insurance, or all women, to your point, came together and said, we want our own insurance, that would be, devastating to those businesses. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of like barrier specifically in insurance to like regulatory and compliance, but like even those are starting to come down a little bit. Wyoming again is creating a sandbox this February, specifically to allow startups to move quicker, faster by bypassing some of these regulatory hurdles. So you're going to start having like DAO-based insurance where, let's just make it an easier one, right? Because like health and life, these are harder, but pet insurance, like if it was just people like I want a pet insurance for people that I believe give a shit about their dog. Like they take them to the vet, they get them the shots they need, they're giving them the best food. Like if you don't get your dog all of their shots, like I don't want you in my pet insurance club, DAO, whatever it might be. And so, in theory, these are going to be pets, dogs or cats that will live longer and healthier lives and have less complications because you're being over attentive to their health needs. And so you would in theory pay less over time because you're not having a bunch of animals with cancer, or you're at least reduced it to some degree, or you're not having animals die prematurely or getting lost. That becomes a big payout for pet insurance. So if I only let people in that like have GPS trackers on their animals' collars or have chips in place, like these are all things that you could enforce or ask for. And I think this is one where I bring this up because this is where it's awesome in that like you could do that. It's a little scary in that does it start to make do we take two steps back and starts to be a little more exclusionary? What if your son did make it and he literally said no women? Like that would be wrong for a lot of reasons. You might be have like an economic justifiable reason of like, hey, premiums are lower. But if I said, hey, no cats, it's like, okay, you're laughing at me now. But like, just to say a certain group is not allowed into this organization, a lot of societal problems that start to arise.
Well, yeah, and I think also you have things like insurance that are based on, some people are healthy and they're kind of paying the premiums for the people. It's a lot like Social Security, right? There's not necessarily equity of distribution, so to speak, in the system, but generally speaking, hopefully it's kind of helping the greater good. But no, I think that one of the things that I've contemplated about our industry is, professional liability insurance. That's something that everybody pay. If you're an engineer, if you're an architect, you pay this money in. The claims are pretty low. They're not, it's almost like a tax. Like you pay it in, but you go to court every once in a while. It's not that frequent, quite honestly. And a lot of people just feel like it's generally a tax on the industry. And that seems like something on a professional level that could be easily organized and executed on, and to the benefit of the industry.
One thing kind of related to that where I get excited is, within our investments, we have a lot of early stage startups, and one of the goals of mine is to try to get them into Fortune 100 companies, closing deals with them. And there's a lot of paperwork that comes with that. And one of the requirements generally is that you've got liability insurance, at least $1 million. And it's funny where I've done this now with 6 startups, got them in, and 6 for 6, they do not have any insurance. A lot of them don't even have an office. Some of them, they're just now getting their C Corp stood up and formalized. But I started thinking like, these 6 or 600, they should just come together and have like a DAO-based small business insurance. And especially if you knew each other, where I know that, hey, like overall, like I can trust KP, so I don't see him screwing over his clients. So I don't see him going to court very often. So I don't see there being issues for like calling in, the insurance. So the odds of us having lower premiums collectively, if KP trusts Marty and Marty trusts KP, and we found 100 other business owners we knew, we could have our own little, DAO-based business insurance premium. Like that, to me, like that one makes a whole lot of sense to me. Yeah. And like that seems like there would be a lot of traction.
Yeah, I think in that vein too, like the workers' comp side, for a bunch of us sitting in front of our, okay, maybe we get carpal tunnel. Like, I don't know, maybe we step on a Lego. Like, I mean, a lot of those requirements, for a Coca-Cola or something, or because there are people on site, and it has to be the same for the person that might be like lifting file cabinets to the same as the person creating a logo. If you're a subcontractor, it's just a requirement. And they don't have the time or energy to figure out, we're going to make it different for different people. But no, I think there's definitely some areas where in business we pay for things, especially as a startup. You just only want to pay for things that create value. That's the deal, right? And you start paying on these other things that you're just like, it doesn't create a lot of value. Like, why am I spending money on this? Like, well, you have to. Like, that's just how that is.
Let's talk about the Constitution DAO for a second, because there were a few things that were really interesting with this thing. So it's a group of people who come together to try to buy one of the, I think, 2 remaining privately held copies of the U.S. Constitution. There's 11 out there. I think all of them are, for public display except for 2. And then this group of people felt like that was wrong and that they needed to get a hold of this so that it could be on public display. The goal was to purchase it at auction and then put it in like the New York Public Library or the Met or somewhere where it could be seen by the world. But the fascinating things, one is that it gets Dows on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So that's a good step forward if you're a big Dow believer and excited. But what was interesting, within 7 days, or within the first 12 hours, they raise $1 million. They need 20 million. Within the first 48 hours, they raise the 20 million. And then on the 7th day, they get near $50 million. And they have, I think it's like 8,000 people. And I think 20% of those 8,000 had never had, we haven't talked about this term yet, but never had a wallet, and they'd never done a crypto transaction before. So one, like, the consumer barriers are dropping, but the ability to assemble people around a cause quickly and then amass a pretty decent chunk of change, in this case, $50 million, like, that was impressive. And then, so, imagine that at even a bigger scale, or imagine the long tail of that, right? Imagine 100,000 smaller versions of that, and that becomes pretty powerful.
Yeah. So I think it's, I did want to hit on this whole idea of a wallet, because I think there's like a takeaway from this is like, great, you guys are saying some words and I kind of get what you're talking about. And, the step one, right? Like, back web 1 was you need to have an internet connection and a browser. Like, that's step 1, right? So we'll talk about that in a second, but I did want to talk about, like, I think the Dow Constitution thing was interesting because people forget it was kind of an experiment. This isn't something, we've been doing it all day. And there were some interesting things that they executed on that I thought was pretty, optimistic for me. One was it Sotheby's or Christie's, or one of the big ones, actually let them bid. Right. Yeah. That's not trivial, right? That's not a trivial thing in these stodgy old auction houses. To say,
and it was also the very first time in history that Sotheby did an auction where the price was both in USD and Ethereum. And right before the Constitution Dow, they sold the very first piece. It was a Banksy piece, but they sold it in Ethereum. Like, that is a moment. Like, this is one of those, I think anyone looking at, like, hey, I want to, be somewhat clued into where the future's headed, line up a bunch of dominoes, and the last domino to fall is the crazy future universe we're thinking about, but watch each domino as it's falling. And this is one that had just fallen, right? And so this is like, this is a take note moment for anyone who's having, sort of doubts.
Right. And that's how, I look at Sotheby's as like, it's run by grandparents, right? It's not, it's a very stodgy world, right? So one, I thought that's like a win, right? That's a pretty big win. They got the money together. That's pretty wild. So the downsides of it have been a little bit, hey, in an auction, to visibly, for someone to know what the bid, like the biggest bidder is, and they're kind of disclosing how much they have. Like, the world knows how much you have in your wallet. That's not the best competitive way to enter into a bid, right?
Yeah, so, transparency was not their friend, because if
right.
They got 48 million, then my bid is 48 million and $1.
Yeah, then Ken Griffin shows up. It's like, I'll give you $1 more, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
So that worked against them, which is, look, that's fine. Like, lesson learned. Well, I want to talk about the second thing was gas fees, but I want to hold on to that, because I want to talk about, like, wallet. And I think it's hard to understand gas fees if we don't understand the mechanics of wallet and all that. So we all want to go out and, like, maybe we don't have a wallet. Maybe you do have we want to go out and get a wallet. Like, what is that? Like, what do I have to go do to get a wallet? I'm assuming that's like step 1.
Yeah. So there's, if we want to kind of walk through order of operations, and I will say all of this, like, the best thing to do is, just realize you're going to burn, and this is a little pricey. There's a little bit of, economic barrier to entry, but you're going to burn a few $100, going down a rabbit hole to learn all this. But learn, make some trial and error, and then you'll be an expert real fast. But you're going to need a platform like Coinbase, where you can actually go and do a trade, where you can convert your USD into some kind of cryptocurrency. Let's just say Bitcoin or Ethereum. And then a wallet is separate from that. And that's the you get this address. Just imagine this really long string, and you can pretty that up and shorten it up, and you got this string, and you're going to go tell places that like, this is me. And then when you tell them this is me, because it is it is transparent, they can see, like if KP sent me his wallet address right now, I could see how much he has in assets, at least in that wallet. You might have more elsewhere. And then I can see all of his transaction history too, which is helpful, because if KP is trying to sell me a used sofa, I can see that he's never transacted ever before. So I kind of trust him less. But if I can see, oh, he's sold, a whole bunch of used sofas in the past. So I kind of trust them. And this is what happens, like, if you're going to start experimenting with NFTs. Like, don't buy your first NFT from someone who's never sold an NFT before. It might be a scam, it might be garbage. But if you buy your NFT from someone who's sold 100,000 NFTs, they're probably pretty legit, and you can feel a little safer about it. But all that's, transparent and public. But yeah,
don't we wish we had that for angel investors that show up and like, oh, I made all these investments. I've done all these, it's first money into Uber. And then they find out like they can't even wire $500 out, but okay.
Sorry. Yeah. So like so like the transparency becomes really, really interesting in that case. And then still, it's early days. So we'll find out like what the problems and how to solve for those are. But yeah, so you'll go to this platform like Coinbase, you'll make you'll convert from your USD. And then like, I think the easiest way to think about cryptocurrency is, imagine like I just told KP that, I'll buy that, I'll sell him my couch, but I'll only accept pesos, Mexican pesos. And so KP's like, oh shit, I go to the bank, ask them, here's $100, I need that equivalent back in pesos. And then he goes to Marty and hands him the pesos, right? This is same kind of construct. You'll just do that transaction on Coinbase, and then your wallet's where you hold it all. And that's where like you get this public viewing into your basic, your existence, your profile. And what also becomes cool about a wallet that I've fallen in love with in this Web3 ecosystem is, it is your digital identity. And a lot of folks use it to get access to a website, like essentially to replace username and password. Now I just connect with my wallet, they know who I am. And then it's a kind of like a one step, one click, but it does feel like as soon as you do it, it feels like the way it was always supposed to be done. And it just feels like a more magical experience.
Okay. So I went and got a Coinbase account. I put some money in. Now I've got some Ethereum. And let's say I want to go buy an NFT, and I do what you do. I do my diligence. Okay, these people have done some things, so I'm going to buy an NFT. Then what happens?
Yeah. So you got like let's just say you actually want to do this. My recommendation is, go Google what a crypto kitty is. Go buy a cute little one. You can get it probably for as low as $40. As high as probably 100,000 if you got like a Gen Zero. But go buy yourself a little crypto kitty. And you can go to CryptoKitty's website. You can go to a platform like OpenSeas, where there's a bunch of NFTs there. You can search for Bored Ape Yacht Club and realize that there's ones that are very expensive. And then you can go to CryptoKitties and buy a cheap one. And you'll just see the one you like, and you can bid on them. So like OpenSeas is kind of an auction house, but there's also like a buy now for some of them. So you say, hey, I'm going to buy now. I'm going to pay the $40. And then you alluded to this earlier. There is this gas fee. So there's this transaction for the miners of the world to go and make this, to basically legitimize the transaction that you're doing, to say like, hey, this is the purchaser, this is what they're purchasing. And then like to actually like, put it on that like transparent open ledger where the world can see it. Like, so for that to actually occur, there's a fee. And this is where this is another sort of instant eye roll moment where people get frustrated with this concept of Web3 being the future, because we were all pretty pissed about the banks for, hidden fees, and, we're pissed about the transaction fee on credit cards, and like merchants hate the 3% that like, Visa and Amex charge. And then we get hit this gas thing, and the gas thing, it can be as high as 50%. Sometimes it's 100%, which is, a little radical. And this is another one where if you're just getting into it, it's going to be really frustrating, because gas fluctuates like by the second. And like, so you'll have to go and get a browser plugin. Like I've got one right now, and it tells me that currently gas is 83, which is pretty good, right? And this is where like way above my pay grade. I can't even tell you what the number 83 means. I just know it's less than 120. And when it's 120, it's too expensive for me. So I'm looking for, and I've never in my short time, really getting into this stuff, like, well, I guess over the last like 6 months, I've never seen that number drop below 60. So it's like, if it's in the 70s or 80s, like I'm buying stuff left and right, because I know gas is a little cheaper right now. But so yeah, gas will frustrate you. But this is one where again, the smarter folks in the room say that, this is a temporary problem. And the innovators, the early adopters, they're fine eating the cost because they're playing, they're experimenting, but that Ethereum 2 or other areas will be cheaper over time.
Got it. And so in the Constitution DAO, so one of the things, so they didn't make it, right? They didn't get the Constitution, and so they're sending everybody back their money, I assume.
Yeah,
right?
so they gave you two options, and this is one again where I'm far from the expert. Almost don't really understand how it all works myself. I'm just kind of going along for the ride. Now I know going into, I only put in $250. I'm just like, hey, it's a social experiment. I'm basically, helping out a friend. I don't have any friends running the thing, but like, I just like, let's just see where this thing goes. I want to be along for the ride, because if they win it, you tell your grandkids one day you were in that first, big popular DAO. They gave us two options. You could get a refund, and then candidly, like the gas, you're basically going to get zero. Like you're going to pay more. The amount you paid to get in, because I paid $250, but I probably paid like another $50 just in gas fees to pay the privilege of paying the $250, and I'd have to, depending on when you get the money out, pay another gas fee. So you'd almost just assume it goes to zero, or you could have converted it to a token they made, this people token. Didn't really understand, because they also at the same time said that they were shutting it down. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, this people token's not going to have any value because this thing's shutting down. But what I didn't realize, and so luckily I convert to the people token just because I'm in it for the long haul. I'm going to zero or going all in on this thing. But because they said they were shutting it down, the world assumes there's a scarcity thing and there's only a finite number of people token. So everyone decides to buy the people token. And now people are wanting to buy other people's token, which drives up the value. And overnight we saw the people token, like my $250 became worth $7,000 in like a 12-hour period, because at like 35x, I'm just like, oh, and don't ask me how or why, other than, people want things that other people want in short periods of time. And then, like I did what a lot of people do. I sold half of it. And then the other half, like, all right, let's just ride. But the other thing that I noticed too, KB, for anyone that's kind of getting into this, you won't notice it until you start poking around. And all the experts in the room will just make fun of me. But for anyone new, once you do something like this, once I turned $250 into 7,000, your instinct on the outside, new to it all, is liquidate that shit ASAP, take your $7,000 and run. But something happens where I almost don't see it as my 7,000. It's like this thing that I got from an ecosystem that I almost want to keep in it. So I'm actually kind of encouraged to like want to spend it within the Web3 ecosystem, not just to quickly liquidate it and turn it back into USD. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of activity happen now, where people are making a lot of money on NFTs, and then they're not just pulling it out of the ecosystem. They're buying more NFTs and they're buying more stuff with it. And then so we grow from there.
Wow. Yeah, that would not be, I generally, if I'm up when I leave the casino, right,
yeah,
I try to leave, right? Because maybe I'll spend money at the steakhouse or whatever, but I'm going to try to like get out of there, because I know the longer I stay in, the more likely I'll walk out with none of it.
No, same. If I'm at a poker table, well, it's tough. If I'm really hot, then I think I'm on a good streak, but I wait until I have that first little bit of down luck. And as soon as that happens, I think that's the start of a trend, and I get out with my winnings. But here I don't know if it's because the early adopterness, I don't know if it's because the innovator sort of just wanting to help and play around more, but there's just some kind of psychological trigger. And then I've talked to a lot of folks about this, did a little bit of research, and it does seem to be a very common thing where the first instinct is not to just pull it out and run, because you're also, it's less like gambling in a sense, in that it's more like there are legitimate things that I want to buy in the ecosystem. It's not like I'm just going to go spend it at the buffet or something, or just do more poker. It's like, I want to buy an NFT, or I want to put it into another DAO or whatever it might be. Or now, I'm starting to work with contractors who want to get paid in cryptocurrency. So I just keep it there and use that to pay them. And it's just another bank account, right? It's like I have a Bank of America. Now I've got a Wells Fargo. My Wells Fargo just happens to only hold pesos. And in this case, Ethereum.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. We've been having a lot of conversations lately about Like, I mean, and it sounds terrible, but like you reach a certain point in your career where like it's like sell and do what, right? Like, and I had one of my mentors tell me a couple weekends ago, like, just always be a buyer, just be an accumulator. At some point in your life, just be an accumulator, and don't get, life events may happen that require you to sell something, but taking money off the table and do what, right? Then you have to go evaluate and figure something out. And I think to your point, unlike my casino analogy where it's like, oh, I don't want to give money back to those guys, right? Like they're kind of the evil, like you're kind of saying like, well, it's within the community, it's fine. Like, but I thought it was interesting about the gas fees thing. I heard that like for the Constitution DAO, like, oh, like I have to pay more than to get my money out. And so, but you always think about this, right? If it was a 40 something million dollar of transaction, like somebody benefited, right? Because the people that put in weren't made whole. Now you were kind of in this weird kind of alternate market that halfway created, right? That was like a good unintended consequence, so to speak. But if someone's moving 40 something million from here to here, somebody makes money. So these gas fees, like who's charged? Like what is that? Like who's charging those? I mean, it's easy for us to get mad at the bank when they charge us fees, Wells Fargo. We can get really mad at them and tweet at them and do all kinds of, but who do we get mad at about the gas fees?
Yeah, so this is one where I'm going to have to politely pass because it gets a little above my pay grade. And in my understanding of it, for anyone who knows what they're actually talking about, it's like they're just going to get mad and frustrated at me. But my understanding is that like this is where that construct of like a minor comes in, or somebody who's or not someone, but bots or groups of folks who are keeping that ledger and that transaction straight and approving these transactions. And so they're getting comped on the back end. And it's not one individual or one computer or one bot. There's many of them, and so they're all getting tiny little pieces of this. So at the end, for any one entity to help with authenticating or validating any one of these transactions, they're getting very little, but it's being spread across, a very wide portion of entities. And so, for us to have to pay $80 for that to happen, feels nonsensical. But then to know that on the other end, no one entity is really getting that rich. Maybe 8 cents. I mean, I don't know what it actually is. But let's just say it was 8 cents. But at scale, they're getting enough to make it worth their time.
Yeah, and by the way, I know you're a little bit concerned, like, hey, I'm not an expert at this. And by the way, that was by design. I mean, when I've quote unquote talked to the experts, I consider myself fairly above average intelligence and fairly technical, but I just get lost. And I wanted this to be much more of I'm just one of these people that I have to go do things to learn them. I can't read the book, read the blog. And I think there's a lot of people that are like that. And I think just like the understanding of like, how do I get started? And then eyes wide open, like, you're kind of goofing around. It's like getting your first, I'm not sure what my first CompuServe account was for, but I got one, like kind of thing. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but so I think,
well, you bring up a good point here for like, anyone that, the reason for tuning into this was that there's a high level of curiosity, but maybe still a lot of skepticism or a little bit of eye rolling. I really look at this back to, think about having to explain to the mass consumer base, the laggards in 92, like how to get on the internet. It's like, well, first, most people didn't even own a home computer. So let's start with the fact like, oh yeah, I have a computer, cool. And it's like, okay, oh, it's pretty cool. I can use my telephone line to connect. And so you unplug your phone, you're like, what do I do? And it's like, okay, you need this thing called a modem. And it's like in 92, you can't go to your Best Buy or Circuit City and go get a modem. Like this thing has to be like, you have to drive like 100 miles, and you certainly can't order it on Amazon because there's no internet and you don't have access to the internet and there's no e-commerce. So you've got to go find this thing called a modem. And then you're like, okay, I got it. Now you plug your telephone in the modem, get the modem to the computer. And then you're like, okay, now what? It's like, oh, well, now you need like, you need like an ISP. You're going to need, you're going to need this thing called a web browser. And this is the most frustrating one. It's like, oh, okay, where do I get a web browser? Well, you download one from the internet. It's like, I'm not on the internet yet, right? And so like you're gonna find a lot of this as you get into like to the Web3 space, where it's like, oh, you need this thing to do this other thing, but it's seemingly like if you don't have the second thing, I can't do the first thing, but the first thing needs to come before the second thing. It's like how does this not make sense? But this is, I just think, remember, like when at this moment in time, we are in that like on the chasm, like we're going right from innovator to early adopter. And this is where I think we're seeing a lot of frustration, because your innovators, like they don't care. They'll power through the pain just to be first and to poke around and explore. The early adopters, that's where you start to get a lot of complaints. And that's where you're going to, people say, oh, it's broken or it doesn't work. This is where you get someone who buys a Tesla early and like they ran out of juice and the charging station wasn't close enough. It's like, dude, you knew you're getting early on this thing. It's not a charging station everywhere, but 20 years from now, you'll never run out of juice, and there'll always be a place to charge, or the car will last 600 miles instead of 300 miles.
Yeah, very cool. Hey, just to so we're almost out of time. Maybe just tell everybody about the Adventure Fund and like what you're looking for. And I think me and you are aligned. Like it's not just good enough to write checks. You have to add value and actual value versus talking about value. But so I think we've been pretty aligned that way. But maybe just to share with everybody the Adventure Fund and kind of why you did it and what your thesis and what you're looking for.
Yeah, Venture Fund, it's a $10 million fund. It's focused on early stage startups, primarily in fintech marketplaces. It's kind of hard to avoid Web3, but really just looking for those big disruptors, ones that are thinking about where the world's headed. They've got the foresight to see a new vision ahead, and they've got a good path or product or technology to get there. And from our perspective, we're looking for, well, when we bring on LPs in how we provide value is, we've been fortunate enough to only bring on folks who are founders or seasoned operators. So they've all been there. They've all seen some version of the problem before, right? Even if we invested in a Web3 startup right now, and even if KP's never worked in Web3, you've seen some version of the problem they're going to face, whether it's a CLV problem or a CAC problem, whether it's a growth problem or a marketing problem, it could be a hiring, retention, like whatever it is, like thematically, you've been through it before. You've gone from 0 to 1. And so that's where the most of the value comes. And then, we really look at it in terms of growth. We know that these are very early stage. We know that for them to survive, they're going to burn through whatever capital we just contributed to, and they're going to have to hit certain metrics to raise the next round. And so we just are there in the early stages to help them get to those next metrics. So we get alignment on whatever those metrics are and say, anytime you're getting a misstep month over month, just let us know. And then let's identify where the problem is. And then let's find folks in our network that have seen that version of that problem. And let's get on top of it. Let's fix it or figure out how to pivot around it.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I know we've been looking at like co-investing with you guys, like when we have something where it's the intersection of construction and fintech or construction, because I think one thing that happens being kind of an industry based, like it's easy to get your blinders on and become very myopic about whatever else is going on in the world. So we've always found that having generalists on the cap table that are focused on the tech stack or the business disruption side of it has always been helpful. So it's been kind of good working with you. Well, thanks for spending some time with us and being the expert. You get to put it like expert, because now you have like social proof now that you're an expert.
That's right. So. That's right.
All right, man. It was good talking to you.
You too. Appreciate the time.
All right, we'll see you.
All right. Bye.